Well, the music means it's time for the press preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Time to see what's making the headlines with the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha, and the chief executive of Conservative Home, Mark Wallace. They will be with us from now until just before midnight. But before we turn to them, let's take a quick look through the front pages that we have. And we start with The Telegraph. It leads with Rishi Sunak being accused of a screeching U-turn on tax cuts, as he pledged to scrap VAT on energy bills for a year if he becomes Prime Minister. The Express praises Liz Truss for promising to cut serious crime by 20% if she gets the top job. The Sun splashes on England's win at the Euros, setting the stage for a final showdown with Germany or France on Sunday. The Metro has word of a fresh set of train and tube strikes, which were announced today. Meanwhile, the FT reports a number of consumer product companies, such as McDonald's, Coca-Cola and Unilever, are putting up their prices because of the increasing costs they're facing. A report by the UK spending watchdog says that ministers and government officials did little to deal with potential conflicts of interest when awarding COVID contracts to a healthcare firm, according to The Guardian. And here is The Star, which quotes Heathrow Airport's boss, who says that people are clogging up airports by faking injuries so they can get a wheelchair and jump the queues. A picture from Little Britain, I think, there. Just a reminder, by scanning the QR code that you will see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of the papers whilst you're watching us. We are joined tonight, as mentioned, by Sonia Sodha and Mark Wallace. Lovely to see both of you. Do hope you're well. Mark, we'll start with you first this hour. Take us to the front of The Telegraph. I mean, we understand their favoured candidate, perhaps, in this context, but someone has described what Rishi Sunak is planning as a screeching U-turn. Explain the story.
So this has been rumoured for the last couple of days. Rishi Sunak started his campaign trying to distinguish himself from some of his rivals who were promising tax cuts here and tax cuts there as fiscal red meat to the Tory membership. He started his campaign by deliberately casting himself the only way he really could, which is to say, actually, I think that'll be irresponsible, I'm not going to be hasty. Reading between the lines, I used to be Chancellor only a few weeks ago, and I'm not going to criticise the tax policy that I was in charge of. The fact that he's now seeming to change tack points to a number of things. Firstly, it's the fact that his campaign is evidently feeling some heat from Liz Truss, who is making a strong argument that we should cut taxes now as an important Conservative measure to help with the cost of living and to spark better economic growth. But it also points to the fact that, frankly, in the polls so far, he's behind. And so if one strategy isn't working, then you may as well roll the dice and try another.
Sonia, do you think the strategy is likely to work? I mean, The Telegraph says this move will cost us, what, £4.3 billion. I mean, isn't it Rishi Sunak's mantra that the unfunded tax cuts proposed by Liz Truss herself, well, it's going to be our children that are going to have to pay for them, it's going to have to be our children's children. I mean, doesn't the same argument apply to his tax cut?
I mean, I think there's an argument that it absolutely does. I guess what he's banking on is that Liz Truss is promising more tax cuts. So if somebody's really concerned about sort of fiscal rectitude and is casting a vote in this contest, they may still go for Rishi Sunak. I think that's what he's banking on. But I think just to sort of take a step back from this, I think lots of members of the public will be watching this feeling quite frustrated, actually, that they don't get a say between these two candidates. It's obviously quite a small pool of people who get to vote, 160,000 or so Conservative Party members. And I think that's what we're seeing in this contest. We're seeing two politicians pitching themselves to Conservative members who sit to the right of the average voter. And so it feels like quite an insular conversation that has so far focused on tax cuts. We saw, really awful headlines, I think, over the weekend where they were trying to outcompete each other on essentially being quite cruel to refugees. And so I do think this contest just has a very strange feel about it, because at the end of the day, the next Prime Minister is being selected, and it is a very, very, very small, unrepresented sliver of the electorate who gets a say. And I think that's what we're seeing play out.
I'm just right on cue. I'm getting handy. It's a couple of papers by our floor manager here. Let's have a quick look then at the front of the Times. Rishi Sunak ditching VAT on energy bills. Again, we get this idea, but just pick up on that point from Sonia, if you can, Mark. I mean, with this very, very small, very, very select group of individuals, I mean, you know, the red meat that's being chucked out elsewhere, I see, you know, curbing militant unions, again, a topic that will certainly please a large number of the Conservative membership. At some point, though, they do have to deliver on these promises, don't they?
Of course they do. I would say, just rewinding a minute, a tax cut doesn't cost us £4.3 billion. It means leaving £4.3 billion in British people's pockets, which they dearly need at the time when the cost of living is rising so fast, when the tax take's already so high. There is an important issue, as Sonia says. It's important to remember that this is about choosing a prime minister. There are a number of stages to this. Of course, the Conservative Party has the right to choose its own leader, and of course the leader of the new government in this Conservative majority parliament has to command the faith and confidence of a majority of MPs, and of those, that big Conservative majority. They need to be able to get on with things. So I think, you would expect me to say this. Of course, it's right that the Conservative Party's members get to vote on who their leader is, but it's still important, to speak to what Sonia was saying, that this debate has got to reach out to the wider country. This is also a time, fine, to win the confidence of Conservative Party members, but the next Prime Minister, whoever wins this race, they should be using this moment to set out their stall to the whole country. And I definitely think there have been moments in this race already in which I think we've seen a bit too much negativity. Interestingly, I think in tonight's debate there was some suggestion that Rishi Sunak's kind of approach to engaging in debate was somewhat more kind of mollifying than it was a couple of days ago, which is reported to have kind of gone down pretty badly with people previously. But it's really important that everyone gets on the front foot. One thing I'd like to stop hearing, for example, is supporters of one candidate or another saying only my candidate can win the election, can govern well, or can beat Labour. I just don't think that's the case, and it's also not something that colleagues should say about each other.
Yeah, well, good luck with that. We'll see if anyone's going to listen to you. Sonia, the front of the Daily Express, again, a kind of a Liz Truss policy proposal, laying down the law, demanding police cut crime by 20%. The headline, no ifs or buts, police must solve more crimes. I mean, isn't the problem with kind of policy announcements like this, the fact that the Conservatives have been in government since 2010?
Yes, absolutely. And Liz Truss has been part of a government that hasn't delivered on the police solving more crime. So I think that's absolutely one issue. The second issue is not very much information in this story about how it's going to be achieved. There's no acknowledgement actually about the numbers of police cuts, the fact that there are fewer police officers on the streets now than there have been at times in the recent past as a result of cuts to the police force. So no one's saying that the police is perfect. I mean, obviously, if you look at issues like a force like the Met has had with institutional corruption and institutional racism and misogyny and homophobia, there are clear issues with the police, and the police need to reform. But just sort of, giving a few newspaper front pages where you say they have to do better in terms of solving crime when the number of bobbies on the beat has been cut. It just doesn't cut it. And I think, again, this speaks to a broader issue in this contest. And yes, Boris Johnson may have stepped down as Prime Minister, but there was something about that style of Johnsonian politics where Johnson just kind of blathered and, actually, quite frankly, completely misled the public. For example, when he said the Northern Ireland Protocol that he had signed did not involve a border down the Irish Sea. I mean, he just basically lied to the public about that. And we've lost something in our politics as a result of that. And we now see, there is still this style in politics. Johnson may have gone, but I think Sunak and Truss are very much heirs to it. You've got Truss just sort of saying, well, the police must do better without setting out a plan for it and without any acknowledgement that she's been part of a government in recent years that has failed to do well enough on crime. So I personally think the public will see past this. There's no plan, and you're not taking responsibility for the government that you've been part of has failed to achieve. And I think just saying to people, this will happen and I'll make sure it happens, I think trust in politicians is low at the moment, and I don't think it washes.
Mark, as we look at page 4 of the Metro, let's reflect briefly, shall we, on poor Kate McCann. I'm someone I'm sure both of you know, ex of this parish, was a political correspondent here, now Talk TV's political editor, who was hosting the debate. Poor Kate, thankfully she is all right, but brought the debate to a bit of an abrupt conclusion.
Yes, and I think the first thing to focus on is, obviously, as you say, that we hear that she's okay, which is a great relief, I'm sure, to not just the three of us here who know her personally, but to an awful lot of people who will be acquainted with her excellent work. And I think, frankly, she was doing a fantastic job in the debate this evening. Her co-host had already had to pull out beforehand, having tested positive for COVID. So, a great relief that she's okay, and very much a shocking moment. Obviously, people at home, me included, didn't know what was happening, but you could see written on Liz Truss's face, as seen in several of the newspapers, that it was a shocking and worrying moment.
But as said, thankfully, everything grand. Sonia, Mark, we will pause there for just a second. Stay right where you are. But coming up after the break, guess what? We'll be talking about this story. The Lionesses, they're on their way to Wembley. We will be reflecting on a remarkable Euros semi-final victory after this. Welcome back. Mark and Sonia still taking us through this election from the papers. And Sonia, let's come to you. And we will, both of you, we will be talking about the Lionesses in a minute, but you're not having a Scotsman celebrating England for the remaining 10 minutes of the programme. Let's instead go to the FT and talk about why European... I know, we'll get there in a minute. Let's go to the front of the FT, Sonia. European gas prices have jumped 20% in 2 days. Frankly, a sign of what might be coming down the pipeline a little later on this year as well.
Absolutely. So this is as a result of Russia restricting supply of gas to the EU through the Nord Stream pipeline. It's something that EU countries have been worrying about for a very long time. The benefit of hindsight is a fine thing. And I think looking back, there were lots of experts warning that that certain EU countries, particularly Germany, were too reliant on Russian gas for their own security. And it's now looking like a real neglect, actually, of energy security policy for the continent, that sort of reliance on the Russian gas supply was allowed to persist for so long. But we are where we are, and this is why prices have spiked so much, because Russia is predictably using the supply of gas as another sort of weapon in this. Obviously, it's very different to the war that it's waging in Ukraine, but it is using it as a tool of its disposal to try and put pressure on Europe. And so you've got people incredibly concerned about what this means for the continent. There's some thinking that perhaps if things get really bad, gas could even be rationed. So it is a very troubling situation. It puts a lot of pressure on the EU and on the continent to move very, very fast in thinking about alternative gas supplies. And I think it's a real kind of warning shot that actually in the medium term, given the status of international affairs and what's going on, tensions with Russia and also China, the continent needs to be much better at kind of more self-sufficient.
Let's talk football then, shall we? Mark, a fantastic result by the Lionesses, 4-0, and the cheekiest back heel I think I've seen in a couple of decades. Fantastic result.
Absolutely. Dreadful news for Ulrika Johnson, meatballs, anything else Swedish you can just about think of, and fantastic to see. But also, as a lot of people have noted, yet another triumph already for the Lionesses, and yet another signal of how much, actually, for how long we've failed to pay the proper attention due to the women's game. It's amazing to see. It's been brilliant to see the nations recognise. Actually, some newspapers front page space tonight for the Lionesses' success. But I also think about the effect of grassroots football. My son goes to football training every Saturday morning with Heather, a fantastic female football coach. This is the future of our football, and it's brilliant to see.
Sonia, your thoughts? Yeah, you got a big smile, yeah.
I completely agree. My little niece, she plays football. She goes to football every Saturday morning. One of my really good friend's daughters, she's a budding player and is a member of a local league. I'm actually going to see my first ever football match in a stadium, which is the final on Sunday, which I'm incredibly excited about. In the works for a long time, long before I knew or thought that England was going to be playing in the final, but I'm very excited about it. But no, it's just been thrilling to follow this tournament, and it really does feel like this is a first tournament where women's football, is starting to be on a more even keel and a more even footing with men's football, and is getting the credit that it deserves. So it's an absolute delight, and I thought it was such an exciting match this evening as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite something to think of. When I was growing up, girls at my school were not playing football. So at the risk of jinxing it, and I want a one-word answer for both of you because we are about to run out of time. Mark, Sonia, is it coming home?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Job done.